Welcome to the podcast, Jan and Jillian Yuhas. I'm so excited to talk about your new book, Boundary Badass. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, I'm so delighted to have somebody specifically talk about this topic because in your new book, there was a quote that I thought was really profound. And you said setting boundaries is the integrity to respect ourselves even when others are unable to see our value. And I think understanding our value and being able to communicate that is so important.
Yes, it truly is. And even though we will experience people in life that may not understand us, or they might even trigger an emotional reaction out of us, it's really important to stay in alignment with our truth and our values, because we can't control every external stimuli that comes at us. And so it's better for us, as long as we stay within our character and our integrity, then we will be seen as high value.
Yeah, we can't just bend to everybody's opinion of what's valuable. We really do have to hold that definition for ourselves. So, can you set the stage for listeners on how you both found this topic? So you became so passionate about it that you're like, we need to write a book. People need to know about this.
So we grew up in a really small farm town of 900 people and moved to a metropolitan city of 3 million. So this was like a huge culture shock for us. And that's where we really learned we needed to have stronger boundaries because people didn't share the same values as us. And then also, I think us being maybe naive or just too trustworthy, we let people into our life before we knew their true colors, thinking that everyone was going to have our best interests, but they obviously didn't. And so you learn the hard way of where you need to strengthen your boundaries in a way that's going to promote growth and have mutually beneficial relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you even have applied this in mediation settings, right?
Yes, so our boundary formula is actually a blend of interpersonal psychology and conflict resolution skills. We first discovered our method in a business setting when our first entrepreneurial endeavors is where we started honing in on operating from our values and setting boundaries from a place of value in order to honor ourselves, but also the relationship with the other person.
Yeah, and in today's conversation, we're going to talk about professional and personal boundaries, which I think it's just so powerful to have kind of a grasp of both of those. But for somebody who's like boundaries, that's such a catchy word. What does it really mean? How do you define what boundaries are?
So boundaries are a form of self-respect, but they also allow us to have mutual respect in our relationships. So as much as we are maintaining our own personal peace and well-being, we are simultaneously also trying to strengthen our relationship with others. And so boundaries define our limits of what behavior is acceptable or unacceptable in order for us to feel safe or have inner peace within that interaction that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and to even think that you're deserving of that, I think so many of us give our power away and don't realize that we need to set those boundaries. So you touched on it a little bit, but how can we be in a situation and what are the red flags that can just signal, okay, we need to create a boundary around this?
So it can be different for every person based on their values or the limits that they have. So a boundary may look different for you that it may look different for me or even my sister here. So for example, if I really value like integrity and I notice that I've had a discussion with someone and they're not showing up in a and using honoring integrity, I might set a boundary around that because impacting me in a way because their behaviors and choice of words are not in alignment, which impact the relationship where I feel undervalued or undermined in that situation. So our emotional triggers will usually give us a cue. That's when we need to set a boundary. So that might look like being ignored, dismissed, like she said, undervalued, betrayed, hurt.
So that emotional trigger that we're experiencing, or it can also be a physiological cue that your body might register, stomach ache or headache, that something is off in that moment, that is your cue to take care of you and set a boundary with the other person. And our values are often the opposite of the emotional trigger. So that's how we know where to set the boundary from.
That's so interesting. And I think awareness is so important in all that we do. And so we're not just these reactive beings.
Mhm.
But I find that so interesting. And that observation that our values are the opposite of what's triggering us. Because now that I think about that, I'm like, yeah, that's really true. So your book has an amazing list of different boundaries to create. And I would love to hear for listeners, can you just summarize some of the boundaries that you cover in your book and are important to create?
So I would say some of the most important boundaries we need to have are probably personal or professional boundaries. It also might include time boundaries or digital boundaries, intellectual boundaries. So we have all different types of boundaries to help honor and strengthen the way that we show up in life, because the way we are aligned is going to allow us to attract what it is that we desire or need or hope to achieve. And so having those personal boundaries is also going to allow us to set boundaries in other areas of our life, even family boundaries or emotional boundaries. Holiday boundaries is a big one. They show up in every facet of life, but that's what's going to strengthen and help us live a better life and be more fulfilled in our relationships too.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. We often think of boundaries as like some kind of contractual thing, like in a business setting, but there are so many other boundaries that are healthy for us to create. So, what are the differences between a boundary and an ultimatum? Because it's so important. We were talking earlier about the importance of connection with
Mhm.
the people that we're creating boundaries with, and not necessarily creating a situation where you're isolating yourself. So can you talk more about that?
Right. So boundaries are meant to bridge the gap between two perspectives and create connection. Ultimatums are usually the opposite of that. They're actually a demand or a one-sided perspective or an expectation being projected onto the other person. And when we set ultimatums, they're unilaterally set, if you must do X, Y, Z, or else. So it's conditional term. If that other person doesn't fulfill that, then it's almost like a threat that you'll just create a greater disconnect and actually resentment in that connection. And so that's pretty much the difference between an ultimatum and a boundary.
And also, too, ultimatums come from a very much a me mindset, and only one person has a voice or say, where boundaries come from a we mindset, and both people have a voice in how they're going to reach an agreement to best negotiate and honor that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really love how your book emphasizes the reader to be the person, the bigger person in the relationship. If nobody's respecting any boundaries, it really gives you an opportunity and lots of frameworks to be able to be the leader in setting boundaries and keeping them. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because
go.
we are responsible for setting and upholding our own boundaries of what creates safety for us. So yes, we are becoming leaders within our own life and communicating to others what feels good to us and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's such an important message. And I thought it was so profound and powerful that if somebody is listening to this conversation and kind of feeling really frustrated with their interactions with other people, and maybe you talk about in the book is your voice is not being heard or not being able to express your needs, what are some ways that we can create that, maybe with the language that we use or the actions that we take in situations where we need to create boundaries or enforce them?
Yeah, so this is where we want to use I statements and then also discovery questions, which are open-ended questions in order to make a request for the relationship. So example might be, let's say, let's use the word trust. in a personal setting. If I could say I feel, I'm trying to think here, I could feel uneasy when there's a lack of transparency and when just talking about XYZ, I value trust. How can we work on being more transparent to improve the trust between the two of us? Or if it's a business setting, we might say it seems or it appears, because we want to depersonalize it. And that also keeps things in a much more business facet communication style. And we want to be assertive, but like I said, we're using I statements and we statements.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought up trust, because as I was reading, I really was reminded that there are essential elements to boundaries. And what are some of those essential elements? And then maybe can you give us some tips on maybe when we have to just kind of move on from interacting with someone and maybe boundaries just aren't going to work?
So there will be certain personalities that we might encounter in our journey of life. And sometimes these certain personality types struggle to see outside of their own needs or fulfilling their own ego. And when you encounter somebody like that, if they're unwilling to work with you and create a line of mutual respect within the connection, even if you set a boundary once or you set it twice with them, at some point in time, if they're still not willing to respect the boundary, then you might have to redefine that relationship and how this person fits into your life.
Which is possible. We have clients who will redefine relationships in business settings or personal settings because they're connected in some way, shape, or form, whether it's financially, through children, whatever it may be, and they can't actually remove this person from their life. And they find ways to have their own inner peace within that interaction and just maybe limit communication or limit their time in some way, shape, or form, but they still maintain boundaries for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So what have been some of the benefits of the clients you've worked with, or even in your own lives, of having these frameworks for creating boundaries?
So I think some of the benefits for boundaries, it creates a sense of inner peace. It allows us to achieve greater fulfillment because we can really manage where we're spending our time. And when you are able to manage spending your time in certain aspects of your life, creating that, work-life balance, it really allows you to elevate your life to the next level and create fulfillment.
Also, I would say too, it allows us to learn more about ourselves, because the more we become self-aware, it's much easier to have that emotional intelligence, which improves our relationships too, because then we know where to draw the line or when to speak up or when to take a step back.
And when you're really aligned to your authentic truth or your authentic voice, you feel powerful in your life.
Right. Yeah, even myself, thinking a few years ago, I didn't grow up with boundaries. I didn't know what boundaries were. I worked in a lot of toxic relationships. I'm sure lots of listeners can relate. And learning about boundaries and creating them, first of all, you have to be really self-reflective. What is it that you want? What is it that's your pain point? What are causing you issues? So it's really been a transformative experience for me in my own life in learning how to create boundaries, and then seeing that there may be more boundaries that I need to create even more peace in my life.
Yeah, sometimes that self-reflection piece can really be scary for individuals who might have unhealed childhood wounds, because if they start to look at themselves, then they have to look at where they might have suppressed emotions or unresolved pain. But until you really face that aspect about your life and your truth, it can make life very challenging, which is why people might develop maladaptive coping skills like avoidance tendencies or people-pleasing tendencies. And so that really doesn't benefit someone's life, even though the journey itself of self-reflection or self-awareness can be a hard one. I promise you will come out in a much better, peaceful place if you go through that journey.
Well, it gives us emotional freedom, and then we build up this emotional resilience. So then whenever we are facing conflict, using this method allows us to speak up in a way that's very calm and constructive, but we're actually able to resolve the problem much quicker and get back to our productivity or duties or whatever that we're trying to accomplish that day.
Yes, it's very circular. It's very cyclical. And I see it where your psychology backgrounds have also played into the creation of boundaries and the work that you have now. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and how you serve your clients.
So when it comes to serving clients, we serve clients across three kind of different niches. We work with family dynamics in the co-parenting and divorce area. We also work with businesses in resolving internal or external relationship capital and conflict resolution. And we also work with a lot of individuals or even couples in order to strengthen their personal and professional and romantic relationships as well.
That is so fascinating. And I think my listeners are primarily moms and parents. And is that if, as moms, we do the hard work to create these boundaries, we're teaching our children this really valuable skill that, as we were talking, nobody is like, there's no class.
There's not.
There's no class. Here's how to create boundaries. It's luck of the draw.
We didn't learn them even in grad school. You think
Right.
we would, but yeah, we didn't learn that. So everything that is in this book is we've gone through our own journey in terms of creating it and
Mhm.
finding something that really can benefit every aspect of our lives. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So, do you have any more tips that you might want to share with listeners about our? I think business is all about connections and relationships. And if there's any other takeaway that you can give to listeners about just our relationship intelligence as it relates to boundaries or anything else.
Yeah, I would say one of the key components to business relationships is going to be sustaining your own emotional regulation, because when we have a clear mind and we're calm and collected, we can logically solve problems much quicker. And also understanding the power of discovery questions. So discovery questions are open-ended questions that allow us to guide the conversation to a resolution. They also help us understand perspective outside of our own, which makes it easier for us to bridge the gap in the disconnection of the relationship.
And I think too, whenever we feel like a violation is occurring, it's so important not to react and go to this like trauma response and internalize it or even try to defend ourselves, because then that's also raising our emotional vibration, which can create dysregulation. So our goal is, whenever something feels uncomfortable or feels like disrespectful in a workplace environment, it's you immediately want to say, okay, can you share more about that or help me understand where you're coming from? And you want to gain more information about what this person's behavior means, because there could just be a simple misunderstanding before we automatically assume that they're doing something intentionally, or they may not even be aware that it's a boundary violation for you, because they may not even be aware of your value system. So it's really important to assess and not assume, especially with work environments, because there's just so many different dynamics that come up, which come up in all different types of relationships, but even our childhood comes out in our work productivity and performance as well.
No, I so 100% agree that your goal should be emotional regulation. It is everything. And I don't think that we talk about it enough. We're in such a busy, hectic society. We're driven by our devices, which kind of, I think, desensitize us from our bodies and our reactions and how we're feeling and what our triggers are, even. They can be subconscious. We're not even aware of what they are. So I love that you mentioned that, because it's something I've done a lot of trauma work, and I think that's so important. And we don't talk enough about nervous system regulation, honestly. I love that you brought
Yeah.
that.
Because if you have a toxic work culture, more than likely that's maladaptive coping mechanisms that people have learned from childhood that they're projecting onto their relationships within the work environment. And so it's going to be very challenging to have productivity at the end of the day if we have a lot of toxic maladaptive behaviors being projected.
I think too, self-care is often promoted a lot in terms of one's well-being, but we don't talk enough about self-love, which is the emotional mindset component that comes with healing. And that only takes half the time, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes a day. But that really does help us regulate, whether it's meditation, journaling, deep belly breathing, or just even going for a walk and getting fresh air sometimes, and incorporating our self-care and self-love together, but making sure that you carve out that time and not just resort to self-care, because I think there is a difference, which is often neglected.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree with that too. And as the owners of a business, you're setting the stage. You're leading, whether you have a team or not. You're the face of your business. And so if you can begin to understand yourself and what your boundaries are, and get really clear on what you need and what you want to project in the relationships that you want to have, I don't think that there's anything that's more important than that. So, and I think that your book really helps in that regard. So I really appreciate it. If there was a takeaway or takeaways that you wanted to leave with listeners of this conversation, what would that be?
To know that you have the power to change any dynamic within your life for a better outcome if you know how to properly negotiate and set boundaries and have constructive communication skills. And all these skills, like we said, none of us learned them anywhere in life growing up. It's something that we started doing as we evolve and get older. And I think life is an evolving for the rest of our lives. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, and I think just if you are fearful to set a boundary, or maybe you have guilt when it comes to setting boundary, just start with little boundaries, or start setting boundaries with yourself first. Okay, I'm going to commit to working out for 30 minutes every day, or I'm going to commit to only working from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So just start creating personal boundaries for yourself that you want to live by. And then it's also going to be much easier than to start setting them with other people in your life.
Mm-hmm. I love that too. The fact that you're mentioning personal boundaries with yourself, that's where it all starts, right?
Yes.
So good. There has been so much value. I highly recommend that listeners pick up this book if you want it. This conversation is really just about empowerment, right?
Yep.
And inner peace and being able to voice your wants and your needs and really creating those human connections and relationships. Isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah, it is. And that's what we're trying to do. Is I think there's so much disconnect. We want to help people create better connections and know that, like she said, change is possible. It's just a matter, it's not changing us like who you are. It's just changing your approach of how you present the conversation.
Yeah, there's so many people who don't own their emotions, and that's part of creating boundaries. And so I love this book. And so, where can listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and get the book?
Yeah, they can connect with us at janandjillian.com. They can also follow us on Instagram at Jan and Jillian, and they'll find links there in order to purchase the book.
All right. I love it, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us and having this important conversation.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.